Microsoft just spent the better part of a decade pouring more than $13 billion into OpenAI, and this week, at its Build 2026 conference, it quietly announced the thing that could make that partnership optional. It's called MAI Thinking 1, and it's Microsoft's first homegrown advanced reasoning model. Now, why should you care? Think of it like this. For years, Microsoft was the landlord who rented out the smartest tenant in tech. OpenAI's models powered Copilot, Bing, and Office. But a landlord who only ever rents is exposed. So Microsoft went and built its own brain in-house from scratch. A reasoning model is different from the chatbots you're used to. A normal chatbot blurts out the first answer that comes to mind, like a student guessing on a test. A reasoning model stops, thinks step by step, checks its own work, and only then answers, like that same student showing they're working in the margin. That extra thinking time is where the magic and the cost lies. Microsoft says MAI Thinking 1 was trained to chew on hard problems in maths, coding, and logic before responding. And the kicker, they claim it does this while running cheaper than the models they've been licensing. That's the real story here. Not just a new model, but Microsoft trying to own the entire stack, top to bottom. So how did the company that bet everything on OpenAI end up quietly building a rival under the same roof? That's where this gets interesting. To understand why this matters, you have to rewind to 2019. That's when Microsoft first wrote OpenAI a $1 billion check, eventually pouring in over $13 billion total. In return, Microsoft got the exclusive rights to plug OpenAI's models into everything Windows, Office, the Azure cloud. It looked like the smartest deal in tech. Copilot exploded. Microsoft's market value rocketed past $3 trillion. But here's what most coverage gets wrong. Behind the scenes, that dependence was a quiet anxiety. If OpenAI raised prices, Microsoft paid. If OpenAI had an outage, Copilot stuttered. And if OpenAI ever decided to compete directly, which it increasingly does, Microsoft was funding its own rival. So in 2024, Microsoft hired Mustafa Suleyman, a co-founder of DeepMind, to run a brand new AI division. His mandate was blunt: build models Microsoft actually owns. They assembled a team, grabbed a cluster of NVIDIA chips, and started training. The first result was a model called MAI-1 shown off last year. It was solid, but it wasn't a reasoning model. It couldn't do that slow, step-by-step thinking. MAI Thinking 1 is the answer to that gap. It's the moment Microsoft stops being a tenant and becomes a builder. Think of it like a restaurant that spent years buying its bread from one famous bakery, then quietly opened its own ovens out the back. The customers might not notice at first, but the economics change completely. And the timing of this reveal tells you exactly how the balance of power is shifting. So what actually happens inside a reasoning model? Let's open the hood. A standard language model works by prediction. Given the word so far, it guesses the most likely next word, then the next, racing to an answer. It's fast, but it's shallow. Ask it a tricky maths problem, and it often confidently gets it wrong, because it never stopped to think. A reasoning model like MAI Thinking 1 adds a hidden step called a chain of thought. Before it shows you anything, it writes out a private scratchpad, a long internal monologue where it breaks the problem into pieces, tries an approach, spots its own mistakes, and corrects them. Only the polished answer reaches your screen. Imagine the difference between a person who shouts the first number that pops into their head versus one who grabs a notepad and works the sum out line by line. Same brain, wildly different accuracy. The trade-off is time and money. That scratchpad can run to thousands of words you never see, and every one of those words costs computing power. Microsoft trained the model using a technique called reinforcement learning, where the AI is rewarded every time its reasoning leads to a correct answer, a bit like training a dog with treats, except the dog is doing university-level maths. Over millions of attempts, it learns which thinking patterns actually work. Microsoft claims MAI Thinking 1 hits competitive scores on hard reasoning benchmarks while using fewer of those expensive NVIDIA chips per answer. But the benchmark numbers are only half the picture, and the other half is where the rivalry really bites. Let's make this concrete. Where does a reasoning model like MAI Thinking 1 actually earn its keep? Picture a developer staring at a bug that's been haunting their code for 3 days. A normal chatbot reads the error, suggests the obvious fix, and gets it wrong because it skipped the deeper cause. A reasoning model traces the logic backwards, considers 5 possible causes, rules out 4, and lands on the real culprit, the way a detective works a case instead of arresting the first suspect. Microsoft is wiring this kind of capability straight into GitHub Copilot, the coding assistant used by more than 20 million developers. Now take a different example. A financial analyst needs to model what happens to a company's profit if interest rates move 2 ways and sales drop 15%. That's a multi-step problem with branches. A guess the next word model fumbles it. A reasoning model lays out each step, keeps the numbers straight, and shows it's working, which matters enormously when real money rides on the answer. Then there's healthcare, where Suleiman's team is especially focused. Microsoft has already shown an AI that outdiagnosed human doctors on complex case studies. Reasoning is the secret ingredient there, methodically weighing symptoms instead of pattern matching to the most common illness. The pattern across all 3 is the same. Anywhere a wrong answer is expensive, code, money, health, slow, careful thinking beats fast guessing. But there's a catch nobody puts on the marketing slides, and it shows up the moment you compare this against the competition. So how does MAI Thinking 1 stack up against the giants? Let's line them up. The reasoning crown has been passed around fast. OpenAI's O-series models started this race, then Google's Gemini reasoning models, then Anthropic's Claude, and DeepSeek out of China shocked everyone by matching them for a fraction of the cost. Microsoft is arriving late to a crowded party, but late can be an advantage. They got to study everyone else's homework. Here's where it gets interesting. Microsoft isn't claiming MAI Thinking 1 is the single smartest model on Earth. They're making a quieter, sharper claim that it's good enough on the reasoning tasks that matter, while costing meaningfully less to run at Microsoft's enormous scale. When you serve Copilot to hundreds of millions of people, shaving even 20% off the cost per answer saves billions of dollars a year. That's the whole game. Think of it like a car maker who can't beat a Ferrari on top speed, but builds a car that does 90% of the job at a third of the price, and then sells 50 million of them. Volume and cost, not bragging rights. The other models still likely edge ahead on the hardest frontier problems. DeepSeek still wins on raw cheapness. Google has the deepest research bench. Microsoft's bet is distribution. It already owns the software billions of people open every morning. And that ownership is exactly what makes the next part so consequential for OpenAI. Now let's talk about who actually wins and loses here, because the ripple effects are bigger than one model. Start with OpenAI. For years, Microsoft was its golden patron, the deep pockets and the cloud that made the whole thing possible. The moment Microsoft has a capable in-house reasoning model, that leverage flips. Microsoft can now say politely that it has options. That changes every negotiation about pricing, exclusivity, and who controls the roadmap. Here's the twist nobody expected. The biggest investor in OpenAI is now also one of its most credible competitors, under the same corporate roof. For everyday users, the impact is subtler but real. If Microsoft runs its own cheaper model, Copilot can get faster and more deeply baked into Windows and Office without Microsoft sweating a licensing bill. You might soon get reasoning-grade help writing a spreadsheet formula or debugging a document. Included free, because it no longer costs Microsoft a premium to provide it. There's also a national angle. Right now, a handful of American labs and 1 or 2 Chinese ones control frontier reasoning AI. Every new serious player reshapes that map, and Microsoft, with its government and enterprise reach, is no small player. But here's the part worth sitting with. When the company that distributes software to billions also builds the AI inside it, the line between the tool and the toolmaker disappears. That concentration of power is the real story underneath the press release. So what can you actually do with this shift right now? More than you'd think. So how do you actually get your hands on reasoning AI today without waiting for Microsoft to flip a switch? Here's a practical walkthrough. First, understand the trigger. Most reasoning models don't think hard unless you ask them to. In Copilot, ChatGPT, or Gemini, look for a button or toggle often labeled Think, Reasoning, or Deep Research. Turning it on tells the model to use that slow scratchpad instead of guessing. The answers take longer, sometimes 30 seconds instead of 3, but on hard problems the accuracy jump is worth the wait. Second, change how you ask. Reasoning models reward detail. Instead of fix my budget, give it the numbers, the goal, and the constraints, then add the magic phrase, think step by step and show your reasoning. That single instruction nudges the model into its careful mode. Third, use it for the right jobs. Don't waste reasoning power on write me a birthday message. That's overkill. Save it for multi-step problems, planning a project timeline, debugging code, comparing two financial options, checking a contract for contradictions. Fourth, always sanity check the working. The beauty of reasoning models is they show their steps, so read them. If step 3 makes a wrong assumption, you've caught the error before it costs you. Treat the AI like a brilliant intern, not an oracle. And fifth, watch your Copilot updates over the coming months. As Microsoft rolls MAI Thinking 1 in, the Think button will quietly get cheaper and faster to use. The tools are already in your hands. Most people just never flip the switch. Which brings us to the bigger picture. So here's what this actually means for you and what to watch next. Microsoft building its own reasoning model isn't just corporate chess. It's a signal that advanced AI thinking is about to get dramatically cheaper and land in software you already use every day. When the company behind Windows and Office owns the brain inside Copilot, that reasoning power stops being a premium add-on and starts becoming the default. The practical takeaway is simple. The gap between people who use AI to genuinely think through hard problems and people who still treat it like a glorified search box is going to widen fast. So start now. Flip on that reasoning toggle, learn to ask step-by-step questions, and get comfortable reading an AI's working before you trust its answer. Those habits will be worth more every month as these models get smarter and cheaper. And keep one eye on the bigger battle. Watch whether Microsoft starts quietly swapping OpenAI's models out of Copilot for its own MAI Thinking 1. That's the tell that the balance of power has truly shifted. Watch the pricing, because cheaper reasoning changes what every business can afford to automate. And watch how OpenAI responds now that its biggest backer is also its rival. This is the moment the AI race stopped being about who has the smartest model and started being about who can put real thinking into the most hands for the least money. If you want to stay ahead of every twist in that race, follow for daily AI news, because tomorrow's story is already brewing.